So thanks, guys, for joining me on the Candidates Podcast. I know John usually hosts these things, but we're doing it a little bit more informally. What are we talking about today?
Fiscal responsibility.
This one's going to be fiscal responsibility. So, yeah, I mean, we don't have a formal introduction here, so let's just jump right into it. I mean, what do you guys want to start on? You want to start on...
Taxes.
That was subtle. I like it. Well, I mean...
Do I need to elaborate?
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah.
The proposal is that they go up 25%, and in 5 years they will be up about 25%.
Yeah.
And if you do the math out, it is a lot of money. And I just don't think it's fair. If you do the numbers out for a $300,000 to $350,000 house, it's somewhere, the exact numbers off the top of my head, but if you're looking at, let's say a $2,000 tax hike, and you make $50 an hour, that is an extra full week, 40-hour full-time week that you're working extra. Like, again, this is not total, this is extra. So in 5 years, you will be working an extra week just to pay for your increase. And I just, and that's a $50 an hour, $25 an hour, that's 2 weeks. I mean, and the people that this hits the hardest are, obviously the less you make, the more time you're having to work to pay this off. It hurts people renting, so you can't save as much to actually buy your home. It hurts people on fixed incomes, seniors. Like, what do you do if you can't work? I just don't think it is reasonable or fair to hike taxes up that much.
And it's not just 1 year, right? That's going to be in perpetuity. Every year the taxes have gone up that much, and every year you're paying that going forward.
Oh yeah, no, this is not like a one-time. It's
Right.
like in 5 years it resets. No, that's.
And there's actually no guarantee it's as low as 22 to 25%. So, because I think the numbers that Brian, you and I were looking at was the proposed numbers from our school board, but there's also the adjusted Act 1 numbers, which go as high as 5% per year, which comes out to, I think, if you compound annually, 28%, something like that, 28% over the next 5 years. So, 25 is kind of a little bit of a conservative number. It could be higher. I hope it's not. I mean, I don't know. So what's the solution to this? I mean, what are we getting for our money? Like, what are people talking about why this is happening? Is it just payroll? Is it the new school? Because I know a lot of the tax, what was it, in 2018, they said that we can expect accelerated tax increases because of them preparing for the new school. Is that what this still is? Because it should have come back down by now, right? I mean, it's been 5 years. They said over the next 5 years. Why are we seeing it for the next 5 years if we've already been through 5 years?
Well, wasn't there also, like the new teacher's contract, I think, built in raises over the next couple of years? Am I accurate on that? And I think that's maybe partially the reason, whether...
Were they preparing for that? Is that what you're thinking?
I think so.
So what did they sign for? They signed for 3% annually over what term? I forget. That was last year. My memory's a little fuzzy on that. But it was 3%, so it was less than what our tax increases are.
Right.
But that might have been part of it. But I mean, that's a cost of doing business, though. I mean, you're going to have to renegotiate that contract
Right.
at the end of every term. I mean, are we just looking at just inflation? Like, what are we getting for our money, I guess, as a resident?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we talk about new school buildings and all that kind of thing. I mean, it's also all the expenses that go along with that, right? Is hiring and all the staffing of a new building and all of those costs. It's not just buying the building, right? That may come from one budget or another. It's all of the costs that go along with that new building. And I guess we could talk about that. I mean, for me, I know Dr. Trickett gave the presentation about kind of making the case of why we need this new building, right? For me, I don't think the case was made fully. It was about this, hey, we're not using these elementary schools as they were built to be made. There's this, call it arbitrary percentage of what we use, right? 85% or 80%. And that's kind of the justification for getting a new entire building. But there was a slide on there about, modifying schools, modifying Green Valley, modifying other, Whitfield or whatever. And it was kind of glossed over as, okay, well, it's not really feasible and we're not going to do it. maybe that should be explored as an option. You know, can we modify these schools? What does that cost look like? Does that kind of get us a few more years? Does that get us further down the road until we can have a better idea of the numbers of enrollment before we kind of panic and just build a new school that we might not completely need?
Well, I think there's other issues with the Lincoln Park site too. For that school, those roads are very small in that neighborhood. The
Yeah, that's
traffic
come
flow
up.
is going to be an issue, and I get that a lot of kids can walk to that school, but how many parents anymore let their kids walk back and forth to school?
We were
There's-
technically a walker at Cornwall, and my wife drove my daughter every day.
Right. So you're going to have increased traffic, which is, you know, we're struggling to get crossing guards now. We're struggling to keep walkers safe already. So how are we going to do that in a whole nother neighborhood with very small streets? And it's still, if we're really concerned about preparing for the future, that site isn't big enough. It's not big enough to build a big enough school to accommodate for future growth.
And maybe just from a priority perspective, I mean, I think you'll be hard pressed to find somebody that doesn't agree that Southern Middle School doesn't need like a renovation, right? You know, it's one of the older buildings, you know, that in Cornwall Terrace, right? But, you know, while we're kind of lumping that in with this larger, you know, construction project of a new building, maybe focus on priorities. We need to renovate Southern, okay? And then you can talk about, do we need to add on some classroom space at certain buildings as opposed to just going kind of whole hog and getting this large construction project and wrapping it in with other maybe high priority, smaller projects.
Well, for what it's worth, I did get some clarity on a couple of those points. So Jeff Simcox and I had a great conversation after, I guess it was 2 school board meetings ago. And I think, Amy, you were with me, weren't you? Or, and he made it pretty clear that at an administrative level, they're not lumping them together. He said what they're doing is they're including them in this next focus. But they are definitely treating them as independent things. Now, whether or not that's actually happening, I don't know. But that's I tend to believe and trust Jeff. He's a straight shooter. He's never steered me wrong in the past. So I think they're just saying, you know, what I really think is happening here is I think you have factions within the board and within the administration, and you've got some that are saying we really need to focus on Southern, and some that are saying we want more elementary schools. So I think you've got little bit of politics being played here where they're trying to do a little appeasement. They swear they're not going to run these quotes together and that they are going to be treated as independent projects. So take that for what it is.
Yeah.
But that's what I was told. As far as the expansion of the schools, holy crud, I got beat up on this one. So the people who are against it say that it's going to be a nightmare for the cafeteria. I don't buy it. Nightmare for the auditorium. I don't buy. Well, the auditorium is the cafeteria in the elementary schools, but
Gyms,
it's
they were saying about
yeah.
gymnasium and
I mean, I understand what they're saying. It's not going to be a nightmare, but you know, there will be a change if they add more capacity with those same facilities. So it's worth noting that that's a real thing. But you know, these schools are built on 25 acres with the ability to be expanded. The cost to expand will be more per square foot than the cost to build. I think they got a quote to add 100 student capacity to one of the schools. And Val, you and I had this conversation. Was it 9 million?
I think that's accurate. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was 9 million, 9 or 10, something like that.
Yep.
Whereas they could build a new school for like 25,
Right.
which it won't be that low, but that's what they're saying. It'll
Yeah.
get 350. So they're saying the cost per student is lower. But I fundamentally reject that whole statement because, you know, you've got capital expense versus operating expense. You know, they treat these numbers the same way that, you know, people in the media treat percentage versus hard numbers. If they don't like the hard numbers, they give you a percentage. And if they don't like the percentage, they give you a hard number. Well, we get the same thing from the administration. If they don't like the way it looks from a numbers standpoint, you know, or from an operating standpoint, they'll give you the capital numbers. But the capital expenses can be bonded. Those don't cost us anything in taxes. So building onto a school isn't going to raise our taxes. I mean, now you're still going to have to hire teachers. You're still going to have to, you know, deal with the staffing issues, which will. Those are operating expenses. But there's a lot of fixed costs that you already have sunk into a school that you won't have to replicate. So that extra money on the construction costs less over time than the money to build a new school. And that's not a conversation I hear anyone having.
And to clarify, because the building an additional school will require this entire like much larger staff to continue to operate as opposed to just expanding on.
Yeah, cafeteria workers, you're going to need administrative staff, principals, vice principals, counselors. Yeah, all that stuff would be redundant. Custodians, bus drivers, like you
Plus
said.
you have a whole other building that you have to maintain.
Overhead.
So you're talking about, in 20 years, 30 years, roofs, all of these things that are going to need to be replaced. So instead of just adding on where, okay, you now have to put a new roof on Spring Ridge, but you've added on, it's just a little extra for that portion versus a whole nother, building to maintain. I don't know. I mean, that's my opinion. I think it's adding a lot more extra costs.
Well, maybe I'm wrong here, but 30 years ago, isn't this why we got away from the local schools? Was because the cost was becoming overbearing? I thought that's why we shut down schools like Lincoln Park and everything else, and we built more consolidated elementary schools, was because it was costing so much to run these individualized local schoolhouses. I thought this was the solution. I feel like we're Groundhog Day in it, where we're back to doing what was a problem before. Won't we create a problem again? I don't. I might be wrong, but I know we shut them down multiple.
So
for
the
a reason.
Lincoln Park building was one class per grade, and they couldn't even fit kindergarten in it.
Okay.
So I think that's why they looked at it was not feasible to use that site as an expansion. So I'm not quite sure what makes that site now usable for an expansion.
It was raised at the board meeting, about the equity of having that versus the other elementary schools, having the land, having the space for the students. So it doesn't seem like it's an ideal fit by any means. And then they tossed around the idea of, a land purchase, which may or may not be an ideal piece of land that they looked at, and how many, millions of dollars that would cost. So we have to keep that in mind, right? If we aren't going to Lincoln Park, where are we going, and how much will that cost?
Yeah.
If we're going anywhere, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to change the topic because I think we covered that pretty well. So I think one of the things that we have to consider when we're looking at the budget too is grant money. So like, for example, the COVID grant money, that was something that we had to fund additional staff for like nursing and school psychologists. And now that grant money's gone, it's been used up. So I think that also sometimes drives the increase in taxes, because we're not then looking at that and saying, well, we're going to continue these programs. It doesn't seem like we're considering, how do we have to cut back now because we're not getting that money anymore.
So what are we thinking here? So I think we found a bunch of problems fairly quickly. We're not too far into this thing, but I know we don't want this to be a 45-minute show. So what's the path forward? Like, how do we continue to educate it? I mean, I don't know, because it seems like there is diametrically opposed stances going on in the community right now. I mean, who was one of our competitors, I think it was Jenny Denny, said something to the effect of, if you understood what it takes to teach these days, you would happily pay more in taxes. But I don't know that children have changed all that much. Kids are kind of kids. I think the adults have changed. But I don't know how much of this is it really that different now, or is it just our view on what we think is important has changed? Have our priorities changed? I mean, I'm trying to figure out from that statement, which I'm not judging that statement. What I'm saying is, what are they trying to tell us with that statement? Like, because I'm not happy paying more taxes. And I do know what it takes to educate a child.
I guess what I'm seeing when I go door to door, right? When I talk to people in the community, I see I see a painted picture of what these people are feeling, what they think, what they're very passionate about. And then when I go to the board meeting, I don't feel like there's a diversity of views. There may be one or two folks who kind of push back on some of these ideas, but I don't see a lot of that discussion and challenging some of these concepts like we're talking about here. It seems kind of a one-way street. And it's different from what I'm hearing in the community as far as priorities. So
what kind of stuff are you hearing primarily?
I mean, specifically talking to senior citizens, they are very concerned about tax increases, especially given the economy where it is right now. I mean, some of these folks They think they have to leave the district. They think, how am I going to keep living in my home I've lived in for how many years, raised a family in? And that's heartbreaking to hear these folks that are, have lived in the community and feel like they're being pushed out.
Yeah, a lot of my clients are senior citizens, and that is something I hear a lot when we're talking about planning for the future, and is the income meeting the needs now? And a lot of times taxes comes up, and it's a struggle. I have people call and say, well, I have to loan against my life insurance because I don't have any other option. I don't have the money. I have to pay the taxes so I can still live here, and they're depleting assets in order to be able to maintain their home.
Well, you're seeing, so many families too struggling with inflation, and you're starting to see layoffs at different. I have several friends who've been laid off from their jobs recently. Increasing taxes isn't going to help those families at all. There's people who are just struggling to put food on their table.
Yeah.
Right now in our district.
60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah. And, food prices have gone up. Utility prices have gone up. Getting back and forth to work has gone up substantially with gas prices. I think that we have to look at it more from what's best for the community, and how we can assist the community get through this difficult time. And still make sure our kids are getting the best possible education they can. So I think that we talk about fiscal responsibility. I think that's what we're talking about. Like, how can we wrap our arms around the community and keep them from experiencing even more difficult times because we're raising taxes, but focus on the education that our kids are getting and optimize the dollars we do have, and make sure we're using them the most efficiently.
That was pretty well said. All right. We're kind of hitting towards the end of this thing. What else do we want to cover? I mean, we can go as long as we want, but I'm pretty sure my attention span watching these things would be wrapping up right about now. So is there anything we didn't cover that you want to say? Brian, I know you've done a ton of research on this. Is there anything that we're missing? Any big stuff?
I mean, not really. It's just if you look into the finances of individual families and people right now, it's not good. Like this is not a. Some people have called it the silent depression. If you look at numbers on how much a house costs to your income, and how many people are living paycheck to paycheck, even compared to like 1930. We're doing like just about as poorly, if not worse, by some metrics, and I just don't. I just don't think it's a fair thing to do to people to tack this on to their already high cost of living and expenses.
Now I'm a solutions guy. Do we have any solutions we want to talk about? Any things that we specifically want to look at? Because $130 million budget. I mean, it's a big budget. It's a big budget, and there is Boyertown's roughly the same size student body wise, right? Somewhere around there. So I try to find other schools in the state that have roughly the same student body to see how we're stacking up. Because if we want to keep from going through 25, 26, 27% tax increases, we've got to find a way to cut expenses. Right, because I think Jay Negrini said it best. Mm-hmm. He said it really comes down to one of two things: either you raise revenue, or you decrease expenses. That's the only way to balance a budget, and he was right. Mm-hmm. And I think, are we all agreeing that expenses are a problem? Are we spending too much? Is that what's going on?
Yes, and then I also think maybe there's some missed opportunities for revenue. So I talked about this before with the virtual academy, and I think we're underplaying the use of that. We could be potentially building that up and charging students from outside the district who want to use that program, and making some income off of that. As far as I know, and far as my research has gone so far, we're the only district in Berks that has something as developed.
Definitely.
So we definitely have an opportunity. We got on the ball with that early on before a lot of other neighboring districts. So we have the opportunity to use that to bring in some additional revenue.
Right, and just to add some context to this, why some folks don't have a lot of faith in some of the current board members. If we think back to the auditorium project, the original version, right, that just became this wish list and add on this and add on that till it became this monster. And thankfully there was enough pushback from folks in the community and some other board members to really take a hard look at that and make some good decisions and reduce it to the project we have today. So thinking in that context, that having a short memory, when we see, new project, phase 2, we're talking about a new building, is this going to become some monster again with the auditorium? We have to keep that on our mind and really keep, any of these projects within scope and really focused on what we need to do for the students and balance that with the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think we teach our children that there's a difference between needs and wants. And I think that we have to look at needs versus wants, and make sure that we're focusing on the needs, because, and of course we all want our kids to go to the most beautiful schools with the best technology and all of those opportunities for them, but do they need that? Is that going to really get them the best education? So focusing on true needs versus wants. Like we teach our little kids, do you need that cookie? No, you want that cookie. So, focusing on needs. Let's really figure out what the needs are and focus on that.
I think there's a lot of fat to trim too. I mean, the fact that we've been changing math programs every other year, the fact that we've been, seem to be signing on to every hipster fly-by-night program that comes out of the high level education academies, and we want to be kind of first on the scene with this stuff. I don't want us to be first on the scene with this stuff. When it comes to educating children, I want tried and true. I want to see case studies. I want somebody else to forge the path and to be able to look at it and be like, okay, that's worth the money. I can see where it benefited. I feel like we spend a lot of money, and I get it. On a $130 million budget, $50,000 is a drop in a can. On a $130 million budget, $150,000 really doesn't matter. But if you do it 50 times, it matters. And I think we do. We have a lot of different interests that have a lot of different wants. And I think we give them all little ones, and it adds up to one big one. And it becomes a huge line item that gets hidden into a ton of small line items. And that's where I'd like to focus. I mean, I think you're all right. I like that we all have different ideas. I think that's phenomenal. But I'd love to sit down and dig through the budget.
Yeah, and just since you brought it up, the curriculum, I know talking with teachers, nothing thrills a teacher more than hearing they have a new curriculum coming,
it's so
right?
stressful.
So once they've they have all the materials, they've mastered this curriculum, they know it tried and true, and then
time to start over
and learn a new one. And there's a learning curve with that, and I don't
Yep.
think that learning curve is going to be beneficial to teachers or students, right? If we have something that works, let's keep it running. And I
Yep.
think get the input of teachers. Let's get some more buy-in from the teachers on that, right? If this program, why are we switching programs so often? Do we make poor choices in the previous program? What are we changing that we're not going to make that choice again?
That's a great question. And is it just the mentality that educating kids now is different than it used to be? Because I know some of the highest rated schools in the country use programs from 30 years ago. And they have not changed because at an elementary level, it doesn't matter. Fractions still run the same, decimals still run the same. They've got teachers that are well trained, and they've got, programs that are well defined, and they stick with it. Maybe they make changes, they tweak, but they don't overhaul. And you're right, teacher burnout is a real thing, and we're contributing to it by constantly pulling the carpet out from underneath them and then saying, do this now. I mean, I don't know. I feel like we create our own problems, and then we blame someone else for them. It's a weird cycle that we're in, but all right, final thoughts. Anyone?
I think I covered quite a bit of ground there.
My final thought will be, stay the course is that mantra of theirs. If you stay the course, it's going to be really expensive to live here. You're not. It's going to be unaffordable.
Well, I think I read somewhere. I have not fact checked this. I know we are one of the highest tax counties in the state, but somewhere I read we're the second highest, which I don't know if that's. I should check into that. But I know we're one of the highest taxed counties in the state, and you can't be bragging about being in the middle of the pack among schools that are in one of the highest tax counties. That means that you're one of the highest tax school districts in the state, even if you're the last in your county.
Right, and Pennsylvania within the nation is one of the higher taxed.
It's definitely in the top 50%, no doubt. Yeah, you're right. It's one of the highest now. You're right. Yeah, we've got a problem. And it's got to be a spending problem, right? Because cost of living in Berks County is not out of control, at least not compared to a lot of other areas. So just got to put the credit card down. So, all right. I think we killed this topic. We fixed fiscal accountability. Nice job, everybody. So, for everybody that stuck around till the end, thank you so much. We'll be back with the next episode, which I believe we're doing discipline, right? Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Keegan, Val,
Thank you.
Brian, Amy, everyone. Have a great night.